Welcome to What If, the show that explores the most fascinating and sometimes frightening hypothetical questions about our world and beyond. I'm your host, David. Each episode, we take a seemingly simple question and unpack the extraordinary consequence. Today, we're looking up into the silent, vast expanse above us that we filled with our ambitions, our technology, and our trash. Our question today is, what would happen if space debris hits the limit? To help us navigate this orbital minefield, we have a very special guest. Michael is an orbital debris mitigation engineer. His literal job is to figure out how to prevent the scenario we're about to discuss. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, David. It's a topic I'm passionate about for obvious reasons.
So let's start with the basics for our listeners. When we say space debris, what are we actually talking about? Is it just old satellites?
That's part of it for sure, but it's so much more. We're talking about everything humanity has left behind. Defunct satellites, yes, but also spent rocket stages, tools dropped by astronauts during spacewalks, fragments from explosions or collisions, even flecks of paint.
Flecks of paint? You're kidding.
Not at all. When you're traveling at orbital velocities, we're talking 17,500 miles per hour, or about 8 kilometers per second. A fleck of paint has the kinetic energy of a bowling ball dropped from a skyscraper. It can shatter a satellite solar panel or crack a window on the International Space Station.
Wow, that puts it into perspective. So how much of this stuff is actually up there?
Well, space surveillance networks track about 35,000 objects larger than a softball. When we lower the size threshold to about a centimeter, our models estimate there are over 1 million pieces of debris.
1 million?
And if you go down to the size of flecks of paint, we're talking hundreds of millions. It's essentially an invisible cloud of hypervelocity bullets encircling our planet.
In your work, you must see some close calls. Is there any particular finding or event that genuinely scared you?
Absolutely. There was an incident a few years ago. We were tracking a dead Soviet Union satellite from the 80s and a defunct U.S. rocket body. Their orbits were predicted to intersect. For days, the probability of collision kept rising. We're talking about 2 multi-ton objects on a collision course.
And neither could be moved.
Exactly. They were just giant, uncontrollable cannonballs. If they had hit, the impact would have created a cloud of thousands of new pieces of trackable debris,
Instantly making that entire orbital altitude significantly more dangerous for every other satellite. We watched, completely helpless. And what happened? They missed by a few dozen meters at 2 combined speeds of over 30,000 miles per hour. That's a hair's breadth in orbital terms.
A lot of us in the control room didn't breathe for a solid minute. It was a stark reminder of how close we are to a tipping point.
Let's talk about that tipping point. That's the core of our what if question today. What is the limit? What is the theory of what happens when we have too much junk up there?
This is where we get into a concept that was proposed back in 1978 by a NASA scientist named Donald Kessler. It's now famously, or perhaps infamously, known as the Kessler Syndrome.
Right, I've heard that term. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, but its scientific basis is terrifyingly solid. Kessler theorized that once the density of objects in low Earth orbit reaches a certain
Certain critical point?
a single collision could trigger a cascading chain reaction.
A cascading chain. So one collision creates debris.
Exactly. Let's say 2 large satellites collide. That single event could generate tens of thousands of new pieces of debris. Each of those new pieces is now its own projectile. They spread out, and now the probability of them hitting other satellites increases dramatically. So those new pieces then hit other satellites, creating even more debris, which hits even more satellites.
And it just keeps going. A runaway feedback loop.
Precisely. The growth of debris becomes exponential. The collisions start happening faster and faster until low Earth orbit is rendered completely unusable. It would essentially create an impassable shell of shrapnel around our planet.
How long would this take? Is this a slow-motion disaster over decades, or is it something that could happen in a week?
That's the frightening part. The initial cascade could be surprisingly fast. Once it starts, the major damage, the destruction of the bulk of our satellite infrastructure, could happen in a matter of months or even weeks. The orbital environment, however, would remain deadly for centuries, possibly millennia. The debris doesn't just go away.
So we would effectively trap ourselves on Earth.
In essence, yes. Future space launches, sending astronauts to the Moon or Mars, even replacing the very satellites we just lost, it all becomes nearly impossible. The risk of a catastrophic impact during launch or in orbit would be too high.
Okay, so let's walk through this hypothetical. The cascade begins. What is the first thing we, down here on Earth, would notice?
The first and most immediate loss would likely be GPS. The global positioning system relies on a constellation of satellites in medium Earth orbit, but the cascade would almost certainly affect them.
So my phone's map stops working. That's annoying, but manageable.
It's much bigger than that. GPS isn't just for navigation, it's a timing utility. The hyper-accurate clocks on those satellites are used to synchronize everything. Global financial markets use them to timestamp transactions. Power grids use them to sync power flow. Cell phone networks use them to manage handoffs between towers.
Okay, I see. So the global financial system could collapse. The power grid could fail, all from losing GPS.
It's a very real possibility. Then you lose your communication satellites, transoceanic phone calls, international television broadcasts, internet connectivity for remote regions, all gone. Global communication would be set back a century.
And what about things like weather forecast?
That's another critical loss. Our ability to predict hurricanes, track wildfires, monitor volcanic ash clouds, manage agriculture, it all depends on satellites. We'd be flying blind. A Category 5 hurricane could approach a major coastline, and we'd have maybe 12 hours of warning instead of several days. The loss of life would be catastrophic.
It's incredible how intertwined our modern society is with this invisible infrastructure above our heads. What happens to the people in space, the astronauts on the International Space Station?
That's the most chilling thought for me personally. The ISS is the most heavily shielded vehicle ever flown, but it's not designed to withstand a full-on Kessler event. It would be like being in a tin can in the middle of a cosmic firefight.
Could they evacuate?
They would try. They have Soyuz capsules docked as lifeboats, but they would have to navigate through the densest part of the newly formed debris field. Their chances of making it through without a fatal impact would be slim. It's a scenario no one wants to contemplate.
This is genuinely terrifying, Michael. It sounds like the plot of a disaster movie, but you're telling me the science is real. This brings us to your job, mitigation. How do we stop this from happening? Are we already past the point of no return? So we've covered the immediate catastrophic impacts on our technology and the potential loss of life in space. But what about the slower, second-order effects? Let's dig deeper into the global economy. You mentioned the collapse of logistics. Can you paint a more detailed picture for us? What does that world look like a month after the cascade?
Most experts agree we are not past the tipping point yet, but we are dangerously close. The most important thing we're doing right now is passive mitigation. International guidelines now strongly recommend that satellites launched into low Earth orbit be able to deorbit themselves within 25 years of their mission ending. A month after the cascade, the world would be in a state of controlled chaos. We're not talking about a sudden apocalypse, but a rapid and brutal regression. The globalized, just-in-time economy would shatter. Without GPS, the entire shipping industry would be crippled. Container ships would be lost at sea, unable to navigate accurately. Trucking logistics would break down. We'd see empty shelves in stores within a week. The initial shock would be a supply chain crisis on a scale we've never witnessed.
So, taking out the trash, basically. We've focused on the technical and economic fallout, but what about the human element, the social and psychological impact? How would society cope with being suddenly caged on Earth, with the stars, which have been a symbol of exploration and wonder, now representing a deadly barrier?
Exactly. Don't leave your dead satellites up there to become a hazard. But that only solves the problem for future launches. It doesn't address the thousands of tons of debris already in orbit. For that, we need active debris removal, or ADR. That's a profound question. The psychological impact would be immense. For generations, we've looked to the stars as the future, as a frontier. To have that door slammed shut would create a kind of civilizational claustrophobia. We could see a rise in nihilism, a sense of hopelessness. But you might also see the opposite, a renewed focus on Earth, a kind of planetary patriotism. With space exploration off the table, humanity would be forced to look inward to solve our problems here at home. It could foster a new era of global cooperation, or it could lead to resource wars and intensified nationalism as we all fight for what's left on our isolated island in the cosmos.
And what does that look like? Are we sending up space garbage trucks?
Something like that. There are many concepts being tested. The European Space Agency has a mission concept to use a four-armed robot to capture a piece of debris and drag it down to burn up in the atmosphere. Another company is testing a system using magnets to dock and deorbit debris. There are ideas for giant nets, for harpoons.
Harpoons in space. That's quite an image.
It is. There's even research into using ground-based lasers to gently nudge debris, changing its orbit just enough that it re-enters the atmosphere sooner. But all of these technologies are incredibly complex, phenomenally expensive, and face huge political hurdles.
And what kind of hurdles?
Well, a satellite that can grab another satellite and pull it out of orbit could also be used as an anti-satellite weapon. There's a lot of international distrust. Who gets to decide which piece of debris is removed? Who pays for it? Who's liable if the removal attempt fails and creates even more debris? These are not easy questions to answer.
So we have the science telling us there's a cliff ahead, and we have some ideas for how to build a bridge, but we can't agree on the blueprints or who should pay for the materials.
That's a very good analogy. We need a global consensus and a sense of urgency that, frankly, isn't quite there yet. The problem is invisible to most people. You can't see the debris cloud, so it's easy to ignore. My fear is that it will take a catastrophic event, a Sputnik moment for orbital debris, to finally spur the world into decisive action, and by then it might be too late.
Michael, this has been an absolutely riveting, if unsettling, conversation. We've gone from paint flecks to a chain reaction that could cripple our modern world and trap us on our own planet. Thank you so much for shedding light on this crucial issue.
Thank you for having me, David. The more people who understand the problem, the better our chances of solving it.
That's Michael Shelby, an orbital debris mitigation engineer, on what would happen if space debris hits the limit. A reminder that the sky above us is a finite resource, a fragile ecosystem that we all depend on. Join us next time on What If, when we'll be asking, what if Earth is no longer spinning as it usually does? Until then, I'm David. Thanks for listening. Music swells up and then fades out.